we have three individuals here who are extraordinary barrier breakers and champions of this cause. And so I would like to ask our co-chairs to come join me on stage. I have also been asked, because we are running a little bit tight, I'm going to skip their bios. If I tried to read them, it would take the entire afternoon. So I'm going to ask them to join us, please, and we're going to jump right on into some very hard-hitting conversation as we jump on in. So please. Good afternoon to Ms. Myers, Mr. Frazier, and Mr. Smith. Thank you all for being here. I want to start, again, I think you all know who these three individuals are and a bit about their background. But I want to start with the observation that you three obviously have been at the top of your fields in these various industries for a long time now. You could be doing anything with the small amount of time that you have where your main focus is not required. And yet you've chosen to devote your attention to this cause. And I was hoping that you could just start by telling us why and what drew you to it. So Ms. Myers, to you to start.
Wow, I don't know that there's any better way to respond to that than saying, hearing stories like we just heard. I mean, this is such a wonderful program, and I did want to pause and just thank Legal Services Corporation and their leadership, of course, for this amazing effort that they lead in such a fantastic way. But one of the reasons that it is so important to be here and to do what you're doing, but to have even a tiny part of responsibility in it is because we have a justice system that is our third branch of government. And the justice system in our country used to be termed, I remember as a young lawyer, the best system in the world. Have you heard that lately? I don't think you have, and I certainly haven't. And the reason in so much of the reason is our inability to provide the legal system and access to it to so much of our population. And when you hear the crying need, just like you've heard described, it is essential to our rule of law that we do have a system that can be responsive to the needs of those who are least fortunate among us and have grave needs, sometimes life-saving needs. So we really do, it's a smart thing to do. As you can see, when legal services steps in, when help is there, you then have a restoration of people to contribute rather than to suffer. And so it is just so important also that we are a compassionate nation. We care about people's suffering, and we see the misery that is caused by lack of justice. And so it's easy to have an interest in serving in this cause.
Thank you, Ms. Myers. Mr. Frazier.
Anytime someone says, Mr. Frazier, I look around for my father.
I'll do my best. No promises.
So thank you. Let me start by saying what a true honor it is to be sitting in the room with 131 legal aid executive directors and their board chairs. You are truly heroes in our profession. I would say my interest in this area goes back to my childhood. I grew up in the inner city of Philadelphia. I'm the son of a janitor. He was the son of a sharecropper in South Carolina. My dad had a third-grade education. He raised 8 children. And I saw all around me what John Grisham referred to this afternoon as the working poor. People who had dignity, people who cared about their family, their children, but who struggled by obstacles that were put in their way, not necessarily intentionally, but obstacles nonetheless. And so as I was growing up, I saw people struggle to stay in their homes. I saw people struggle to get the kinds of benefits they may need if their child had a disability. And I knew these were good people. And at that time, I just thought that was part of being poor. As I became older and became a lawyer, I realized that those things were the result of the way our justice system runs. The fact that there are people who could have access to those benefits, people who could stay in their homes, people who could be protected from the kind of abuse. And I want to thank Julie and Chloe for that very moving presentation we just heard. I think Julie's talk reminds us that no 6-year-old child merits the treatment that she got. And the only question is, as a society, are we going to provide the resources necessary to protect children like Julie? So when I became a lawyer in Philadelphia, I decided that I would do a lot of pro bono work, much of it on the criminal side, but also some of it on the civil side. And when you would go into family court, you would find out, for example, that people who had to be protected from abusive spouses often didn't get that protection. People would be killed or hurt badly because they didn't have a lawyer. So I guess I would say that my interest in this probably stems from my childhood, but also stems from seeing firsthand how our justice system works and doesn't work. Our Justice Gap study says 92% of people's legal issues are either not addressed or inadequately addressed. Let's think about it, 92%. Why don't we just round it up and say 100%? In a country like ours, there's no excuse for that to be the case.
Brad?
Well, it's hard to follow that, Ken, but in some ways I would build on what you and Harriet both said. You know, I think we're all to some degree the product of our own experiences, and for me, I think it was one specific experience that opened my eyes, frankly, to the importance of what you all do every day. I was a 12-year-old in southeastern Wisconsin, and I was, a very happy middle-income kid. And one summer, I decided I'd earn some extra money by going over to a nearby farm and picking onions, where you would get paid by the bushel. Everyone else there was really a migrant farmer. There were families that came up from Mexico, and I would get down on my hands and knees, that's how you'd pick onions, and I'd be next to these kids who were unbelievable. They worked incredibly hard. They were so much better than me. I'm like 1/4 of a bushel full. They're already up to the first bushel. But I got to see through their eyes where they lived at night, the housing conditions that existed for the migrant workers, their families. And it helped me appreciate that there was really no law to protect them. And I came away with a lifelong interest, first in migrants and then immigrants and refugees, and you could pull that thread to a lot of things I studied and then helped co-found Kids in Need of Defense. But what it really left me with was a lifelong appreciation that justice is, in fact, the cornerstone of our republic, but there is no justice without law, and for an everyday person, there really is not much law without a lawyer. And therefore, it just has always given me an interest in at least doing what I could around the edges to help people like you, people who I think dedicate not only your careers, but your lives to making real, that promise of real access to justice.
Thank you for that, Brad, and thank you all for those stories. They're incredibly powerful. Ken, I want to come back to you. I worked in law schools at a legal aid clinic, and then I was an entry-level prosecutor for a couple of years. And you don't have to spend long in either of those systems to realize that in many respects, those courtrooms, housing court, or DA's office are the emergency rooms of a justice system, right? You don't know what's coming through the door. Serious stuff gets referred elsewhere, but it's triage. you're the executive of a healthcare company. That system is also stressed to the brink. So I'm wondering if you can share with us a little bit about how you view these systems as interrelated, or what lessons we could take from the effort to try to make sure that everybody gets access to healthcare, about an effort to make sure that people get access to justice.
Well, I think it's pretty clear that in this country, too few people have meaningful access to health care, too. But there is a very important distinction, and that is that our government does take responsibility at some level to ensure that people get a minimum level of health care. We have Medicaid, for example, for poor people in this country. It's not always adequate, but it's a basic level of health care. I think the lessons that we've learned in trying to make quality care accessible to many people actually apply to the legal side. And I'll just use a couple of things that I think are things that are making a big difference today. I know we're going to be talking about technology later, so I won't spend a lot of time on that, Brad. You can talk about, I know we have a presentation this afternoon about AI and what AI could end up doing. But I think in the healthcare field, we saw, particularly in the pandemic, how important technology was in delivering health care to people, not just in inner cities, for example, but in rural areas where the ratio of patients to doctors is an ungodly ratio. So we learned in the pandemic that a lot of quality care could be delivered through technology, particularly, for example, with the mental health crisis that we have in this country. People just don't have access to physicians. The other thing that we learned is how we should think about the human support for medical care. So in Philadelphia, I'm involved with a group of people who are trying to train community health workers, because there never will be enough physicians or nurses to address the healthcare disparities in this country. And a lot of important work can be done by people who are trained, not necessarily trained to do surgery. They don't have to be. There's a lot of work that can be done. In my old neighborhood, my old zip code, I was talking to the dean of Temple Medical School, and she was saying that about 25 African-American men have an entire leg amputated each year at Temple because of peripheral artery disease, because they don't realize they have a problem. That's an analogy here. People often don't realize they have a legal problem. And so a big part of what we need to do is we need to use technology. We have to overcome the computer literacy problem that people out in the world have so that they can access it through the technology. And also we have to think about training some people to do some work that doesn't necessarily require lawyers, because while it would be a wonderful ideal for everyone who had a legal problem to be able to have a lawyer, the 92% data tells us we are so far away from that that we have to find other solutions.
I want to get to the technology question in a second, Brad, but before I want to go to you, Harriet. You have spent your entire career breaking barriers, right? From private practice to firm management to counselor to the president. And you have seen how structural barriers exist despite your ability to persevere through them. There are massive structural barriers that exist to ensuring this access to justice. I'd welcome your thoughts on what some of those are, given, as you cited already, that 92% figure.
Well, I think the solution to this whole problem is if we could clone John Levy. But seriously, the concept that John has been such a sponsor of, and really we are a product of, has been the Leaders' Council, which involves a discussion beyond just lawyers and just judges, but taking out into the community, the business community, making these issues, the legal issues that people don't want to talk about and don't know about, taking those issues, these stories, to our entire communities everywhere, so that there is an understanding of the difference that legal representation provides in legal confrontations, legal issues. So I would think if we could continue that in every one of our communities, that will help break down what people don't see as something that is theirs to deal with or their problem. And then we do need, to Ken's point, we need a different solution to all just lawyers for matters that can be handled by trained individuals. And we are in Texas very fortunate to have a very progressive Supreme Court, our Chief Justice Nathan Hecht, and somewhere here is our liaison, Justice Brett Busby, who is a tremendous advocate for legal services. They have led us to, as part of our commission work, to study paraprofessionals and how they can be trained, and also examining non-lawyer ownership, how that could spur innovation. So we will spend in our strategic planning over the next couple of years trying to implement the removal of the barrier of just there aren't enough people to step in and help through innovation.
Brad, it's a nice segue to you. We heard Harriet talk about the role of business here. You obviously heard Ken talk about the opportunity of technology. AI seems to supercharge that. There's going to be some that are threatened by that with the legal profession. There's also enormous opportunities about that in trying to fill that 92% need. So if you can tie this all together in less than 3 minutes, that would be super helpful.
I'll give it a try. It's all about connecting people to data and then AI. Look, legal services are always going to be delivered first and foremost by people. There will never be an adequate substitute for a great lawyer. But I think every great lawyer represents one client at a time and pours themselves into that and maybe many clients at the same time, but each client gets the lawyer's attention. That's indispensable. But to drive systemic change, because I think that's part of what brings us all together, you need to move beyond that. And the key to that is data. And, for example, some of the work that we've had the opportunity to support the last 5 years through a justice reform initiative is, in a sense, taking every Chloe Brown's photo album and building a data set so that across the country, community groups can gather the data and open the eyes of police officers or prosecutors or judges with respect to sentencing guidelines and start to move the needle towards a more equitable and fairer sense of justice. The future, I do believe, is extraordinarily exciting. And look, I'm a guy from Microsoft. What else do you expect? But I say this as somebody who's done pro bono work of one sort or another for 4 decades. We should be able to use AI to broaden access to justice more in the next 10 years, frankly, than in the 5-decade history of LSC. Because I see what it can do in so many vital processes. We are a multilingual country. Translation can be knocked down as a barrier with AI to open up understanding of people in different languages basically instantaneously. We can use this to help gather data, to do first drafts of summaries, to analyze materials. It is a tool that I think radically can advance what individual lawyers or groups of lawyers can accomplish. We will never have enough lawyers in this country to serve everyone in need. But I do believe that with this new technology, we can go farther than we have ever gone before. And I think that should be our goal.
Brett, please. Thank you for that. And I think for many of the lawyers in the room, the fact that AI is not putting us all out of business is somewhat reassuring, so good to hear. If there's been a theme of the afternoon, it is storytelling. From the extraordinary panel we had with John Grisham and Chloe, your incredibly powerful words. Jim Sandman, John Levy, what you have shared this afternoon as well. I was served in public office. I won't tell you what part of Mr. Grisham's talk I found most resonated most with me. It might be the voter part. But the piece here that I would say is I stole quotes from lots of people and often tried not to attribute them because it sounded better when somebody else said it. I will attribute this one to Jim Sandman because he said it over and again, and some of you will remember this. But I asked him about it on the way in, and it's still true that today, we as a society spend more money on Halloween costumes for our pets than we do on legal services. And it's not actually all that close. So to all those storytellers out there and 3 incredible storytellers here, thank you for your advocacy and your work to try to ultimately get on par with Halloween costumes.